Hi everybody, my name is Jens Larsen. In this video I'm going to go over 7 different things that you can use when you're improvising over a major 7 chord. So the first ones are going to be really close to the chord. You can pretty much apply them to any kind of major 7 chord that you come across. And the last ones are going to be a little bit more specific and a little bit more surprising sounding. There are also going to be some that you probably already know, but then I'm going to try to add a little bit of a different point of view and some new ideas, and in that way you can add something fresh to your vocabulary. As a jazz guitar player, I'm constantly trying to find new things that I can insert into my playing and trying to discover new ideas and new melodies that I can use. And one of the ways that I do this is of course just by improvising and playing with other people when I'm doing gigs. And another thing that I do is also that I'm checking out a lot of material, so solos by people like Pentatonic or Chris Potter or similar artists, just to find new things that I can put into my playing. I think this idea of developing your own playing and constantly trying to learn new things is really a big part of what it is to play jazz. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar, about improvising over chord changes, checking out some interesting arpeggios or chord voicings, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to make sure not to miss anything, then click the little bell notification icon next to the subscribe button. To keep it simple, I'm just going to use a Cmaj7 chord to demonstrate everything that I'm talking about here. So the solo that you just heard me play over the backing track is just on a static Cmaj7 chord. And the first thing I want to talk about is really basic, and I'm pretty sure you're already doing this if you're improvising over major 7 chords, because this is just about using the arpeggios, the diatonic arpeggios that fit with it. What I'm using here is really just the Cmaj7 arpeggio and then the arpeggio from the third, which is the E-7 arpeggio. For any chord you play, those are the 2 arpeggios you want to start checking out first and see if you can make some interesting lines with, because they're almost always going to fit no matter what kind of chord you're working with. What is a little bit different in the way that I was doing it in this solo is that I'm not playing sort of the normal stacks of thirds like this. I chose to use some other structures and some other ways of playing these arpeggios. I'm still using the same notes, and this is really just coming out of the idea that an arpeggio is of course just sort of a melodic version of a chord, so we're just playing a set of chord tones, but you don't actually have to play it in stacked thirds. And I think that's something that we often forget, so we're practicing our arpeggios and we're always practicing them like. And that's of course not the only way you can play an arpeggio. So instead of just playing the thirds, one thing that you can do if you want to have some more interesting melodies and some more interesting intervals is to start using chord voicings as arpeggios, and that's what I'm doing here. So I used the Cmaj7 shell voicing, which is this one, and also the drop 2 voicings of both the Cmaj7 and the E-7, and those are great things to check out if you want to have some new melodies. The big advantages here is that you get some larger intervals, so you don't only play thirds and seconds like this, you really get a good mix of different intervals, and since you're still playing chord tones, they're easy to get to sit well in a solo. When I'm improvising over a major 7 chord, I'm not only using the arpeggio from the third of the chord, I'm also using the minor pentatonic scale that's found from the third of the chord. So in this case we have the Cmaj7 and the third is an E, so that means that I have an E minor pentatonic. So if I just play this with a C bass note, then you can hear like that's a really good fit and everything sounds good, so everything is consonant, it's easy to use. Of course, when you're working with pentatonic scales, we have a certain vocabulary coming out of rock and blues that's connected with pentatonic scales, and you can tap into that, so you can do this type of phrasing, which is good. You can definitely use that in a situation like this. One thing that I like to do is also to get some other sounds and really use some of the other structures that are maybe a little bit less common, or that are not really a part of the rock vocabulary, and that's to play stacks of fours. So, and that way it sounds a lot less like the typical sort of AC/DC pentatonic. One of the ways that I do this, and that's also something I would suggest you check out, is to start working with other fingerings for the pentatonic scale. So maybe check out what it's like to play them as 3 notes per string. So, or also have these alternating patterns where you are using 3 notes on one string and then 1 on the next one. So stuff like this. That works really well for creating certain lines. So you get like the, and once you have those in your fingers, you can really get some larger intervals in there. The stacked fours are easier to play, so there are a lot of advantages to starting to check this out. Triad pairs are really great to really nail a certain sound and really spell out certain extensions or notes over a chord. And in this video I'm actually going to feature 2 triad pairs because I have 2 different sounds that I'm using. Well, actually I have more sounds, but there are 2 different sounds where I'm using triad pairs because it's such a great tool for this. This first one is the more neutral of the 2, so that will work with basically any kind of Cmaj7 that you come across. I'm really just using 2 triads out of the major scale, so the G major triad and the A minor triad. The notes that gives us on top of the Cmaj7 is that we have the 5th, the 7th, and the 9th, and from the G major triad, and from the A minor we get the 13 or the 6, the root, and the 3rd. So we have a complete picture of the chord, and then on top of that we have the 13 and the 9th. So really just basic, good sounding notes on top of a Cmaj7. So the idea here is, of course, it's not really only about the notes that we have, because you would have those notes if you just played the major scale. So the bonus here is that when you're starting to think in triads, you can make certain melodies and in that way get some new ideas. So what I'm doing when I'm soloing here is that I'm really just mixing up the different triads in different ways. I don't have a set way that I'm doing this. It's really just improvising, but first using, for instance, I think the opening statement is something like A, C, E, so just the A minor triad, and then going into a second inversion G major triad. And that way just mixing up these 2 triads using different things, and you can of course do this also like with the open voiced versions of the triads. So there are lots of ways that you can use this material to get some interesting melodies, get some larger intervals, and also just use the fact that you have sort of these 2 sets of colors, and that when you're soloing you're sort of spelling out one triad and then moving to another one, and in that way it's also changing what you're emphasizing on top of the chord, which is also a really nice effect. I really like to use Quartal arpeggios when I'm improvising. I think it's a nice sort of refreshing sound, because most of the time, as I already said in the beginning, we kind of get stuck in just using scale fragments, which are basically just like seconds, and then also the arpeggios, which are usually just going to be like stacked thirds. So to get a different sound, using the Quartal arpeggios is a really great way to just have some other sort of groups of notes that you can use when you're improvising. There are many ways that you can sort of approach the Quartal arpeggios. I already talked a little bit about how they work well coming out of the pentatonic scale, so that's definitely a place you can check them out. And another thing to do is just to really work on your diatonic Quartal arpeggios. You can't really name the Quartal arpeggios because they're not, well, you could call them sus chords, but that's not always going to be really useful for when you're using them. So it's better just to know what notes are in there and then apply them in that way. And basically you can use, in this case, if I'm just looking at like the sus structures, so if I play it as chords instead of arpeggios on the middle string sets like this, then the ones I can use are pretty much going to be the ones that don't contain an F. They're all going to work. And even some of those with an F you can use as well, but you just need to melodically get that to fit in the right way. But in general, like, all these will work really well on top of the Cmaj7 sound. They don't have the F in there, and they will give you that type of sound. So you can play them like that. The other way to play them is to play them like this, where you have the fourth interval on one string. That might be easier for your right hand. Of course, then it's more difficult for your left hand. But that does give you other advantages. So also using another technique to play these is something that can give you some new ideas. In the solo that I played, I'm doing both of those. You want to be able to play sort of one note per string arpeggios, but I think you also want to be able to have this type of structure in your playing as well. When you're superimposing pentatonic scales, it can be a really great approach to sort of use the sound that's connected with the pentatonic scale and then just put that entire sound on top of the other chord where you're using it. So in this case, I'm using sort of more of a Lydian sound on top of the Cmaj7, and the scale that I'm using is an Am6 pentatonic scale. So there are two different scales that you can consider Am6. It's not really clear what is what there, but the one that I'm talking about in this example is the one where you take a straight A minor pentatonic scale, so good old A minor box like this. You find all the seventh, so the flat sevenths of the G in there, and then you change them to a 6, so an F sharp, and then you have this scale. And that's a great scale to get some other sounds out of. For me, when I'm using this scale, I somehow always have the association that it sounds a little bit like Robben Ford, or it sounds a little bit like B.B. King. Those are the two people where I hear that type of sound. I don't even think B.B. King really uses that scale directly, but he does have that kind of sound in his playing quite often, so that's why my association is like that. You might have a different kind of association, but I'm really relying on this to create certain types of lines when I'm playing this, and that's really the idea here. So I'm just using those type of melodies and working with that on top of my Cmaj7 chord, and in that way creating sort of another layer and another type of sound on top of the Cmaj7. Another way to get the Lydian sound across is to use a triad pair. So the second triad pair that I want to talk about in this video does just that. And here I'm combining an A minor triad, which gives us the 13, the root and the third, with a B minor triad, which is a major 7, a 9th, and the sharp 11. So here's where we really get the Lydian sound out. So these two triads are really great for just having some shifting colors, but still really emphasizing sort of the sharp 11 on top of the chord. And that's also really what I'm doing here. Again, I'm using the triad pairs so that I'm combining open triads with both the root position and the inversions of the triads. And I think it's really important, if you're checking out triad pairs, spend some time learning first just to play freely all the inversions over the neck and explore that. You don't have to sort of sit and work on it with a metronome to get it as fast as possible. I think it's more important that you just have some way of just improvising. For this is the A minor triad, just to use the different places where you have this and explore that, and expand your fretboard knowledge so you can do that, and then start working with combining the two triads and just improvise freely using them. So like this, and then you can take that to a backing track like I just did in the solo that I played. Of course, you don't only want to play stuff that's completely inside all the time when you're improvising over a major 7 chord. So this last example is a little bit more in the exotic or interesting or surprising department. And what I'm doing here is that I'm using another pentatonic scale. So I'm using E major flat 6 pentatonic. Now you wouldn't maybe quickly sort of associate that with C major 7, but the E major flat 6 pentatonic is sort of a subset of an A minor melodic scale, and if you look at the C major 7 that's found in that scale, then that's a C major 7 with a sharp 4 and a sharp 5, so that's a Lydian augmented C major 7, and that's sort of a more dissonant, or at least a more surprising sound on a C major 7. That's what I'm using here. So the scale that I'm playing is really just this scale. And of course I'm saying this E major 7 with an E major flat 6 pentatonic scale. I usually think my pentatonic scales in minor, and the funny thing with this one is that the way I think about this one is actually that I'm thinking of it as being a C sharp minor, and then I'm lowering the C sharp, so the root, down to a C. So this one. So the sound we get here is really just the C major 7 sharp 5, because that chord is in there, so C, E, G sharp and B. And then the other core note of the Lydian augmented sound is of course the Lydian sound, so that's the sharp 11, and that's in there as well. And that's really the notes that we have here, and we're really emphasizing that sound, and for that this scale is really great, plus the fact that because it's a pentatonic scale with an augmented triad in it, like this, then it has a very distinct sound, and that's something that's kind of nice to work with when you're making melodies, even if you're just sort of really just playing patterns within that pentatonic scale. So for that reason, this is worth checking out. And I think the way you construct it is from the C sharp minor and then lowering it. But of course, when you need to improvise with it, then you do need to know it better than that. You can't sort of think of it and constructing it while you're playing. I'm pretty sure that there are some of these 7 suggestions that you didn't use before, that you don't have in your vocabulary. So I hope you have fun exploring those. But I'm also really interested because, as I said in the beginning, I'm always trying to add to my vocabulary. I'm always trying to find new things that I can use. So if you have a great idea for something that you're working with when you're playing over a major 7 chord, then leave a comment. Of course, everybody who's watching this video are interested in this topic, so you will also be doing them a favor by sharing your ideas. And if you check out the comments, maybe you can get some new ideas besides the ones that I went over here. So that's certainly worthwhile checking out. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar and this is the first time you see one of my videos, then subscribe to my channel. The videos that I publish here every week are on finding some solid methods and good strategies to check out all the interesting things about jazz guitar and improvising. If you like this video and you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page. I'm very grateful for the support that I'm getting from my patrons, and it's because of that that I can keep on publishing videos every week. If you join us over on Patreon, I can also give you something in return for your support. That's about it for this week. Thank you for watching, and until next week.